if you remember correctly, we had a brief conversation on how I said, the perfect manager for the Giants would be Bob Melvin. And I believe like earlier that day, or maybe it was the day before, because I had read prior before the news broke that San Diego was going to keep him. I had read that he might be leaving. They might be looking to move on before they were going to, commit that they were going to finish out the contract with him. So that's why I had brought that up that night. And you spoiled my excitement by saying, well, no, San Diego just announced that they're going to stick with Melvin.
It happened earlier that afternoon. So it was an announcement. Obviously there was nothing official, but that was prescient timing on your part.
Yeah, it's interesting that both teams we're discussing here have had announced that they were sticking with their manager, and then boom.
Don't believe a word we say.
My wish comes true. The Padres didn't even hesitate, much like the A's didn't hesitate to let Bob interview and go to the Padres. I mean, the A's knew what
A's didn't want to pay him.
Yeah, they didn't want to pay him. They knew what they were going to be, so why have them? The Padres.
It's a similar situation in San Diego, ironically.
Yeah, and as I read more about this to just bring myself up to speed before doing a podcast tonight,
always a good idea.
AJ Preller, the San Diego Padres GM, he and Melvin never really had a solid relationship.
Yeah.
They argued consistently on lineups, roster construction, and everyone, agreed to talk to the Athletic but remain anonymous. But one player said that he felt with the interactions that he had seen that the relationship was unrepairable. It almost reminds me of Moneyball and how there was that huge headbutting on lineup construction and who was supposed to be on the field. And I just immediately thought of that when I read
that movie's so great to reference because that's really our only, granted theatrical peek into what those interpersonal dynamics might be like between a manager and a general manager. But that shit goes on, so I could totally see what's happening there with Preller throwing a chair out of his office into a hallway wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Bob Melvin wanting nothing to do with him. It's a little different dynamic 20 years later as analytics have taken over and are universally accepted. But it's just ironic that it involves a former A's manager again. But you guys win. I mean, I think Melvin, we've talked about it for years. He's a great manager. And I was shocked that San Diego would let him go, and let alone let him. There was a little bit to that. They had to allow him to interview with the Giants. At that point, I think anytime before November 1st, you had to get permission to interview. And it sounded like the Padres are like, "Go ahead. Here, take my wife, please."
Yeah.
That was a text joke back and forth. But
yeah, when I read that the Padres let him interview, I said, "Oh, this is a done deal." That right at that point, I'm like, "This is over," because he's an ex-Giant. Well, excuse me, he's an ex-Giant player. He was he fought for the Giants, so he's always wanted to manage there, and the timing just never really worked out. So he's kind of getting his wish. And then him and you probably read this. Him and Sadid, the president of baseball operations for the Giants, they were together in Oakland. So that's where Fadid was, when he started.
Farhid Zahada, or what's his name?
Yeah, Sadid, Farheen Sadid. Zadi.
I don't think
Zadi, Zaidi, Zadi.
Okay.
Farhan Zadi. Sure. We'll call him Z for the rest of this podcast for everyone's sake.
I like that. That's
Melvin took the job, and he was Melvin's point of contact, and they immediately hit it off. They had similar analytics ideas.
Okay.
They didn't always agree on like who should be playing when. And Z said he learned from Bob that sometimes you got to go with your gut. The
Mm.
analytics don't always hold true for the situation.
I think that's the most practical way to handle that argument, analytics versus scouting, everything else,
Yeah.
use analytics as a tool, but it's not the end all be all, and I think that's the healthiest way to look at it.
Yeah, and they basically outlined in this article that the reason Kapler's not there is
Mm.
he just never disagreed with anything that was given to him. He's just like, "Okay, yeah.
Really?
Yeah." He
He
never
was just a yes man,
they were just
push
all on
button
the
manager.
they were always on the same page, and they literally said in this article that the 107 games they won, that team was completely run on analytics, nothing else. They
Mm.
literally looked at the numbers and said, "This guy is in the lineup tonight. This guy is not." End of story.
Yeah.
And it worked for
It
one season.
worked for one season,
Yeah.
yes.
Um,
Not so
so
much afterwards.
that could be what, maybe that's also one of Kapler's flaws is that he doesn't have that ability to adjust in game.
He
If
definitely
he
doesn't have a gut.
yeah, he doesn't have a gun,
So,
but I would not want to. I don't want to get in an argument with him at a bar.
yeah, no,
Um,
he will kick
he'll
everyone's ass, but
Yeah, he will beat me and then who's ever with me just for fun.
I'm
But
surprised he ever gets fired from a job because I would think whoever's firing him would be terrified for their lives.
they do it over Zoom.
That's the best way to do it.
They the Zoom meeting doesn't finish though because the computer gets destroyed. But so I think this renewal of this relationship, their contracts are tied together, which is a big
Okay,
deal for the Giants. They're
that's
both
interesting.
signed through 2026. So basically, Bob Melvin and Z have 3 years to right this ship, get it back on track, get it to some consistency that Giants fans and the Giants organization is used to, and that's the commitment they've made. I think it'll work. It'll work from the standpoint of they'll have winning teams. The question is, will they be able to win enough games when now you have a division with the Arizona Diamondbacks, the mysterious Padres, who are by far on paper, even with some guys leaving, are the most stacked team in that division, and the
Yeah,
Dodgers.
I would say the Dodgers are probably ahead of them, but you've got a tough division no matter what.
Yeah. And the Diamondbacks are only going to get better. They're just a team on the rise.
I Yeah, I'm so confused with the Diamondbacks. They were just all year, they were decent. Honestly, I didn't see them as much better than the Cubs, and literally they finished one game better than the Cubs. They did sweep them at the end of the year, but they didn't look great. It's just sort of testimony to get in the playoffs and see what the fuck happens, and they got all the way to the World Series where they fit.
Word Hole Media.